Yeah, hello. So there has been a lot of claims or what you would call tutorials on how to make donuts from scratch. So unless you are going to eat these donuts raw, this is how you would cook them. Yes, so get the donut wherever you're getting it, maybe from blenderguru or CG Geek. Get your donut from there or make your own, better yet. And yes, this is how you would cook that donut. And you can see we have the them cooking. I don't really have to explain that. I can just see them being cooked. And if before you ask, how are you cooking them without a stove? Well, we're using grid induction here. Yeah, so let's get started with this tutorial on how to cook the donuts. So let's open up a new blend file here and get your flying pan, and I'll just borrow this one here. There is no need to start from scratch. I'll paste it here. It comes with the materials and everything. And yeah, so as you can see it, I'll subdivide the screen and also subdivide this here. Give this the shader editor, and let's start some cooking. So for the oil, we are just going to borrow an edge loop here. I'm just holding down Alt and then right clicking or left clicking one edge here to select the entire loop. Then hit F to fill that into a face, and then hit P to separate that into its own object. Now this still has the material object from the flying pan, so I'll remove that, add a new material, and give it a base color of something that looks. Is this even? Am I selecting the right thing? Just make sure that you only have one material in your material setup. So then go to the transmission, give it a transmission of 1, and then reduce the roughness. Then go to the material settings, just scroll down and give this a blending mode of alpha blend. You don't have to do this if you're going to use cycles, but because I want to keep this very fast and my computer is a very shitty PC, I'm just going to stick to EV. But the render settings should work in cycles as well. And also need to turn on screen space refractions, and go to the render settings as well and turn on screen space refractions as well from there, and see how our oil is looking good. You can also, let me first hide this frying pan. You can also give this some volume. Yes, the shape of the frying pan. Just using the bevel tool, then smooth shading this to kind of give it that look. We also need some resolution here, so I'll just insert this a few times. Maybe give that a sharp edge like that. Perfect. And unhide this. You can see how our oil sits in there. I think we need to add some surface tension around the edges because it's too flat right now. So if we select the center and expand the selection, we can push the edges down so that we kind of create that refraction around the edge to mimic surface tension. And now for the donuts, again, I'm not going to show you how to make the donuts. You can watch a CG Geek tutorial or blenderguru and get the donuts from there. But you know, I'm not going to use a torus. It comes with a lot of resolution, and my PC again won't be able to handle that. So I'll just create mine from scratch. Yes. What I'm not going to do is show you how to texture it. I'm not going to texture it and things like that. I just want to use something very simple here. 16 vertices, and hit F, insert, delete that face, extrude out, then select the outer rings, bevel that like so, shade smooth. I think this is the equivalent of using the torus again. But if you want to have this kind of bulge or be more big, you can just use Alt S to expand it or contract it, make it small like that. I think that's a good donut, and now we can place it in our oil, cooking oil. You can see something like that. Now, it doesn't look very convincing like that, so we want to make it boil, turn up the heat. So what we're going to do is just borrow one edge loop. Let me first push this outside and maybe turn off random colors so that we can see the distinct image objects. So I'm going to borrow a ring here, Shift D, duplicate it, and then P to separate it from the object, and select that ring, select everything, extrude it just a bit. We're going to use particle system to emit the bubbles from there. And what I'm going to do also, parent this to the donut like that. Now we can go to the particle system, add a new particle system, play back, and you can see all the particles will be falling down. Why are they not? Okay, it seems our normals are facing the wrong direction, so you can also check the direction of your normals by going to this drop down and turn on face orientation. You can see if the normals are facing the opposite direction, you'll see that red. So just select everything, Shift A to correct the normals, and you can see. Oh, okay. The reason why these particles are dying quicker than what you're seeing is because I borrowed this flying pan from this project, and it came with the collision system or a collision property that kills all the particles that touch that flying pan. And since we extruded the oil from the flying pan, it also came with that collision system. So let me first remove those, and I will add them later. So right now you can see your particles will be falling through. So what you want to do, you want to go to the particle system, under the field weights, remove all the gravity, so that they're just going using the normal velocity, but we don't want them to go that far. And maybe we're also going to be rendering an object instead of these halo objects. So let's add that bubble. So I'll use a UV sphere, and because my computer is not that powerful, I'm also going to turn the segments down to about let's see, 8 by 8. That's enough. And I'll also give this, actually let me select the particle emitter and go to the render settings, set the render as to object, and select these as the render object. See, this is what we have. And now let's give this particle its own material. So give it a transmission of 1, and reduce the alpha a bit, remove the roughness, and you can see this is what we have. And again, go to the particle settings and turn the blending mode to alpha blend, so that you can see through. Let me call this donut 2. If my blender looks a bit different from yours, it's because I'm using blender 2.1 and not blender 2.8. But everything is, the settings are still in the same place, at least the ones we're going to be using. So far this is where we are at, and these particles are going too far. And again, since this is parented to this, I want to have it around there, and also make sure you hide the emitter ring. Maybe also let me have it a bit wider and push it inside the donut like that, and those particles should be emitted on the floor or surface of the oil. Let me also reduce my timeline to about 100 frames, but the particles you can see are going too far, so let me select those particles, the particle emitter, go to the particle settings, and I don't want the lifetime to be that long, so let me put it at around 3, and also turn on randomness, and you can see now what we have. I'm also going to play around with the scale here, give it a random scale. You can see this is what we have. What would sell the effect is to have some motion in the flying pan. So select the donut, turn on keyframe animation, and start moving that around. So In my original project, I used the Rigidbody System. We'll be doing that later, but just want to have some motion in here. And then later we can focus on the Rigidbody System if you want to use that. You can see. So I think we need to also increase the particle count. So let me select the emitter. You can also find it under the outliner. You just have to select the parent and expand it. It will be inside that parent as a child object. So let's increase the emitter count to about 100, and let me reduce these particles and maybe increase the lifetime to something like that. And let me also play around with the materials here. I think, let's see. Okay, let me first expand this, the particles here. Okay, I think that's good enough. Maybe increase the lifetime a bit. Also, the other thing I did is that I duplicated. So if you select the emitter and duplicate it using Shift D, and scale it down so that is on the inside, because you also want to have some particles, some bubbles inside here. But right now, because the normal is facing the opposite direction, they're also being pushed out instead of inside the donut. So what I'm going to do, make sure you only select the inside thing, and then Shift N to flip the normals to the inside, and now the particles should be emitted on the inside. I'm also going to reduce the size of this donut just a bit so that you can see the inside better, like that. Also make sure you expand that inside ring to be in the inside of the donut, like that. I'm going to reduce the scale here of this donut just a bit, so maybe not that small. Now we can have small particles like that and also create another particle system that uses the same particle settings and the same. Just, I think 100 is enough, but this time for the render object, again still use the same object, but I just use a larger scale for the larger bubbles. And again, the lifetime should be around 3, and make sure that I turn off the gravity as well for this. Yes, and again, let's see. I'm seeing the full bubble instead of half of it. So what we're going to do, instead of seeing the full bubble here, let's select the particle instance here, and select half of it, and hit F to cut it into half so that we only see half of those bubbles instead of seeing the entire sphere. Also, I don't want this animation on this. I don't know, mistakenly added those keyframes, something like that. Now this still doesn't look very convincing. So what I'm going to do is give this oil some deformation or some movement to it. So I have this texture, this water texture, that I think added some good detail to my oil. So let me expand this. Where is it? This here. You can search for water ripples, bump texture, and you can find something similar to that. So just copy this, and I use this as a bump map. So vector bump, connect this to the height, and then this to the normal. And then you can hit Ctrl T to turn on the object mapping, but make sure you have the node wrangler add-on enabled, and then the texture coordinates. So we're going to be using object, and we can add an empty here to control our texture coordinates. Right now the scale is too high, so I'm just going to select this empty. Now you can scale it up or scale it down to get, and you can see now already our water looks even, our oil looks good. But right now it's a bit, I think the texture, the bump is a bit too high, so reduce it to something like that. The problem is that when we play back, it's still very stagnant. So what I'm going to do is parent this object to the donut, and that it will drive the oil movement. Actually, I don't like that movement because it's following the donut. So what I'm going to do is just clear parent and just animate the X direction here. So go to keyframe 1, hit I to insert a keyframe, and go to keyframe 100 and change the position just a bit, and insert a keyframe again. So if we play back, you can see we're getting something. And just to break that movement a bit, I'm also going to add a texture, magic texture. If we preview this, this is how it looks. And I'll add a convert math node to this, just to control, if I want to control the contrast, if I wanted to, and then mix this with a color, mix RGB, mix it with the texture we're getting from the water, from this here, and use that as the height map. I can control the factor here, so just preview this. You can control how much those this magic texture comes through, and yeah. So if we preview this, and you can also add texture coordinate to this and animate. This time, let's animate. Let me see the Y value. So insert a keyframe here, and then insert a keyframe somewhere there. If we play back, now we get something like that. I think the noise texture is going through quite a bit. So let me reduce that just a bit. Maybe increase the scale of the ripples. Let me maybe scale it down, scale it up actually, and increase the influence just a bit. What I'm also going to do is select these nodes we have animated. This doesn't seem to be animated for some reason, so let me make sure insert a keyframe there. Select each node that you have animated, because you can see at the beginning it starts very slow and then increases in speed, and we don't want that. So hit Ctrl T to toggle between the timeline and the curve editor, and make sure you have a node selected, and select everything, hit V to change the interpolation to linear. Let's select also this node here, change the interpolation to vector. I think this is a bit too fast, so I'll slow it down by scaling up the keyframes, and make sure you do this for the other node as well. And it's still going too fast, so I can scale it even further. Let's select this. If you want, you can also add a displacement modifier to kind of have some distortion or displacement in this oil as well. And then if you want, you can also duplicate another donut here. So it would help if you just use the Rigidbody System. So I'll just select this. Make sure you're also selecting the emitters as well, because you want the donut to have its own particles. I think I'm going to make these a bit darker. So you have to do a little bit of experimenting to get the right materials here. So let me see. I need to scale down these bubbles. They look very uniform. So I'll go to the particle system. the second particle system. Let me scale these just a bit and give them a shorter life. I think 2 should be, or 3. Make sure they have some randomness to them as well. And also make sure you turn on screen space refractions for this instance as well. Now let's make sure that the colors match the oil. You can see now we have something interesting. I think I achieved better animation for these ripples. Let me see, how did I scale these? How did I animate these? Because I think the animation for the oil here is very much better than the animation for what we have here. I think the scale is a bit down, so let me scale it up further to get more larger ripples. Maybe. Anyway, I'll be posting a time lapse of creating this original version on my second channel, Blender Money, so that you can examine all the steps I took to achieve this, because sometimes you forget the settings you use, the right settings. It's always a lot of experimenting. So yeah, I think the ripples here came out a little bit better than, and also I think, yeah, for the to kind of give these a good animation, because you can see in my original version, the donut, after they fall into the oil, they kind of float around in there. And if I increase the timeline just a bit, you can see, okay, I think I didn't bake more than 100 frames, but you can see they kind of float around in the oil. And the way I did that is that I used a Rigidbody System. So I threw these donuts into the oil. So let me just set a keyframe at around here, give them a slight rotation, and around here as well. Randomize the rotation just a bit, and if you play back, see nothing's really happening. So you can then go to the Physics tab and give it a Rigidbody System to make it respect the keyframe animation. Because you can see right now it's just falling down. I'm talking about this donut here. Right now it's just falling down. So you just turn on the animation for a few seconds and then turn it off to give the donut the initial push, and then it will fall into the oil. So we're going to do the same here. Rigidbody, animate it, set a keyframe, and then a few seconds later turn off the animation, and you can see what we are having. Then what you would do is, after, because you can see the particles are being emitted out of the oil, which is not realistic. So after the donut starts settling into the oil, you can select the individual emitters. Where is this? So I think this is it here. I want it to be inside the donut, not outside of it. Then you can go to the particle system and start timing the start frame. So I know this particle system, it will start emitting the particles at around 32 frames. And remember, we have 2 particle systems for each donut, so make sure I start this at also 32 frames. Also, another thing to note is that these 2 donuts are using the same particle system. So if you change one particle system, it will affect the other particle system as well. So you can see they're all being emitted. They all start emitting at the same time. But I want the second donut to start around here. So for that, make sure you duplicate the particle system so that you don't affect this particle system, and give them their own settings. So 49 and 49. 49 for this. Again, make sure you scale this in and scale out the inside value to be inside the emitter, the donut. You can see you start emitting them. So one is floating around, the other one is not. So you can select the flying pan, and another thing I didn't mention is that when you give these objects a rigid body system, make sure when you give the donuts a rigid body system, make sure you give the flying pan also a rigid body system, but a type of passive. The reason that it already has one is because I copied it from this project, which had everything set up. So just make sure you also the oil should not have any rigid body system, because as you can see, these are just sliding on top of the oil, and we want them to be inside. So remove that rigid body system so that they can just, and see our rigid body system is our flying pan, and it has a collision shape of a mesh so that they can fall inside the flying pan instead of just floating above it. So if yours are floating above, change the shape from convex hull to mesh here, and it should be good. And to make these donuts go kind of float around, you can also play around with the surface surface friction. The default I think is about 0.5, and they won't slide, they'll just stick on the floor like that. So you can reduce the friction to have them kind of float around like that. Another thing you might do, if you don't want them to be fully immersed in the oil, you can add another rigid body, passive rigid body, to act as a collider, and you won't render this version. Make sure you don't render this. It will just act as a surface for which these donuts can float on, use as a floating object. So if I give this a passive rigid body, you can see, again, make sure that the friction is turned all the way down, and you have them float around for a few seconds. Yeah, so that's how I set up everything here. And I also gave these donuts some displacement with a noise texture. And if you turn on subdivisions, they will look even better. But for my project, when I do that, they actually, it's not slowing down. So yeah, this is how I did that. Let me just set this to 100 frames. And, great. Yeah, so that's how you fly donuts using an induction grid. By the way, this is our induction grid here. Yeah, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next tutorial.